Hi, my friends. Today I'm going to be talking with you about EMDR therapy and my thoughts about EMDR. I am a fan and I recommend it for certain people. And so I want to talk with you a little bit about EMDR and so the tools and how it can be used as a verbal interaction or even as a nonverbal, and how it can be used with kids and how it can be used with IFS and how it can be used with Santrate. We've got lots of places to go with EMDR. So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And the idea, my favorite way of understanding it is was presented by my trainer. The training I went to on EMDR was Roy Kiesling, and every trainer of a protocol like that is going to have their own spin on it. But I went to Roy Kiesling's training, and the way that he talked about EMDR is that the sort of fundamental principle that we're working with a brain, and the brain is an adaptive organ. Okay, so it wants to find the problem, solve the problem, find the problem, solve the problem, and it's a machine of doing that. And we use that machine over and over and over again, and sometimes our experience of something that our brain is trying to make sense of has an adaptation, but it's a maladaptive response. So, for example, I'll tell you my husband's trauma. I don't know if he'll appreciate this. I'll have to ask you, honey, how do you feel about me sharing this? Okay, so my husband had a trauma when he was younger. Of his experience of it is that he got trapped under an inner tube while they were swimming and couldn't get out. And his experience is that he almost died. And he now has, a really, I'm putting my hand here because he has a really sensitive reflex. If you go to have your hands anywhere near his neck, or if his breathing is impinged in any way, his immediate physiological response is terror. And so with Roy Kiesling's model of EMDR, the way you would break that, it's not actually, if somebody touches your neck, just puts your, grazes your neck or something like that, it's actually doesn't mean you're going to die. But in his brain, it does mean he's going to die, right? Because it's a flashback to this earlier traumatic memory. And that's the idea of it, is that, it was a maladaptive belief that he developed that if I have any kind of, I think the word is occlusion to my breathing, that automatically means that I will die. And so that's a maladaptive belief schema. So in Roy Kiesling's model, you're working with the brain is going to adapt, find the problem, solve the problem. The organ of the brain adapts. And sometimes it gets it, I hesitate to say wrong, but not helpful ways. It's just a not great adaptation to believe about yourself. Every time you put on a tie, I mean, his isn't that severe, but every time you put on a tie, you think your body thinks that you're right back under that inner tube and you're drowning. That's not a helpful way to go through the world. So you work on this concept of belief schema. And belief schema, you usually, as a clinician, you're trying to help the person come up with their own, what did that mean to you kind of a thought. And what do you wish you believed about yourself, right? So I was under the inner tube and I wish that I believed about myself that, I can calm myself down and open my eyes under the water and try to find where there's a clearing, and that I could push up. Or I believe about myself I can survive very difficult circumstances, because in fact I have many times. So with EMDR, the practice is to find the trauma, figure out what is the belief you have about that. And it could, it's survival things or guilt things. I'm looking around to see if I have a list with me, but there's a long list of cognitive beliefs that we have about ourselves. And so you can come up with your own, but your EMDR clinician will often have a little list you can look at. And it has things like I'm not safe, or I have no value, or I'm all alone, or I'm no good, all negative stuff. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in counseling. And then it has a list of positive cognitions as well. What do you wish you believed about that? Now, the thing is about wishing, wishing doesn't change the fact that something awful happened. So if your trauma is like related to something traumatic that happened, let's say a best friend died, or you witnessed like a murder or something, wishing that you had a different belief schema, you're not going to be like, I wish that I believed that it didn't happen. Like, life is still life. It's more about how we experience our belief about ourselves in those moments is what you're working on. So if that makes sense. And in EMDR, they will call that a target. The target is that belief schema associated with that incident. And okay, so eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. The acronym stands for the fact that somehow the eye movement, although I will say any kind of bilateral stimulation, like our bodies just naturally have an inclination to process things through walking or rocking. We soothe each other with, think about holding a baby, like you're going to rock back and forth, side to side, whatever. Our bodies like bilateral stimulation. Sometimes when you have a really good hug and you're trying to comfort somebody, you're patting them on the back, sort of while you rock. You're doing all kinds of things to help the body experience safety. So bilateral stimulation can come in the form of, in EMDR, a butterfly hug where you process like this, or patting on the knees. But, Roy Kiesling in his training, he even talked about doing some training in an African country. I can't recall which country it was, where he didn't speak the language. And they didn't have clinicians, but they had endured something traumatic. And he had them draw the trauma, and then they danced. They moved their bodies bilaterally because that was appropriate for the culture and also met the needs of moving the body in a way that is bilateral stimulation. And so the eye movement, the EM in EMDR stands for eye movement, but really you could think about that as any kind of bilateral stimulation. And then there are tools associated with EMDR. And so a lot of times what clinicians will have is there's a tapper, which I'm going to show you. There's you can run bilateral music and while you're processing the memory, and it goes back and forth to help your body experience bilateral stimulation. Or sometimes the clinician just uses their hand as the tool, and you're following that that waving of the hand back and forth. Sometimes it's like this, sometimes it's the whole hand, sometimes people use like a wand, and you follow that. But the idea is that you're moving the eyes, and we do this in our sleep, in our REM sleep, we are doing eye movements back and forth. So there is something about that that allows us to process it. And okay, and then the other one that I like, because I'm an introvert and I don't necessarily like to talk so much in therapy, which I like to talk here, but whatever. This isn't as vulnerable for me. Anyway, this is what's called a tapper. I just want you to see some of the tools. There aren't a lot of tools in therapy, but this is one you might see. So it's got a little, these things have been around forever. I think this one's been kicking since maybe 1980. It's an old tool. So it's called this is called the TheraTapper. There are other ones. And this is the box that the clinician holds. And then it's got a long cord, right? So you imagine your clinician sitting over in their chair, and then across the room, sitting in a couch, right? The client is holding these two little paddles, and they buzz. Okay, so they just kind of vibrate in the hand. You could also tuck them under your thighs, and if you're working with kids, you just tuck them into their pockets or put them in their shoes. And the idea is that they just alternate the buzzing. and they alternate the buzzing in really fast. You can make it, which I use when somebody is like trying to work through something that's really scary and they're having a hard time. I go faster. Like, we want to get through that quickly. And when you're doing other things like with EMDR, you're desensitizing the trauma, but then you're reprocessing. And so when you're getting through, I make this motion, when you're getting through and you start moving over to the reprocessing, you actually want to slow that down. Like, we want to stay in a belief of like, I'm strong enough to take care of myself. I am a survivor. I have value. Whatever the positive cognition, when you're actually doing this session and you're recalling the trauma, it feels pretty intense, and then it sort of naturally curves as your brain starts to make a better adaptation to a healthier belief schema. You actually I slow down the tapper so that it settles in more. Like, we want to stay there. That's where we're trying to go. And so it has a variable speed that the clinician's turning it up and down, and also based on what the client likes. Some, people like faster, and some people like slower, and that's all fine. And so you can recreate that with the hand. If you're doing hand movement or the light bar, which I'm sorry I don't have a light bar to show you, but when the light is moving across your visual field, you can make it go faster and you can make it go slower. Same thing if you're holding a wand of some kind, you can make it go faster if they're wanting that or needing it because of the intensity of what they're working through. So this is called a tapper, and I just wanted to demonstrate that to you. It also can be stronger or weaker. Some people are more sensitive and don't like a strong thing buzzing in their hands, but the idea isn't like that. Tool just facilitates. It doesn't do anything magical. It just facilitates a bilateral stimulation. But again, you can get a bilateral stimulation by going for a walk. So sometimes, because I like the whole concept of EMDR, but it's not my favorite delivery. I like to go to EMDR therapy. I like to talk about EMDR therapy, but I am not a great EMDR deliverer, probably because I had really great EMDR and I can never deliver at her level. So I'm like, don't know that I want to do that. But since I don't really like to deliver it clinically, what I will do with clients is teach them the negative schema, positive schema. So we'll break that whole thing down. What were the series of traumas that sort of fit in this sort of neural pathway? All of the times that you felt like you were worthless. And then sort of what's the origin of that, or which one do you want to work on? And you will kind of target, like I said, the word is target. You'll target the one, and it sort of cascades across all the rest that are in that particular pathway, that belief. So if the belief was I'm worthless, when I was in 4th grade, I had this experience, and last week at work, I had this experience, and also when I was teeny tiny, 6, I had this experience. Which one do you want to work on? And as you work on that belief of I'm worthless, you're desensitizing that by remembering and processing those memories. And then it naturally curves toward, what do you wish that you believe? I wish that I was a person of value. I wish that I believed of myself that I'm a valuable person. So what I would do as a clinician is just set up the whole thing. I kind of think of it as the conductor. You're bringing online the negative and you're bringing online the positive. And you do the negative in a really sensory rich way. What did what were the smells associated with that? What did you feel in your body and where? So you're kind of getting in there and breaking out that memory so that you can start to overlay a positive belief schema, and it happens naturally. It is a little bit magical, but there's real science behind it. What was I going to say about that? Oh, so since I don't really like to deliver the actual protocol, I'll do the whole setup. Let's find the negative. Let's think about what do you wish that you believed. And then I'm like, go for a walk and think about those things. This is what I'm saying. Like, therapy doesn't need to be elitist. Like, there are very accessible ways to get at these concepts from either a self, management, resourced, you can call it self-help if you want, kind of way, and then go to the clinical, to clinical work, go work with a clinician if you can't overcome it on your own, or if you would prefer to do it with a clinician. But I get fearful when communally we decide that we're just going to get stuck in our traumas because we can't afford to deal with the problem. Some of these things don't cost anything. So if you can understand negative schema and positive schema, and you can go for a walk or perform some other kind of bilateral stimulation like dancing or butterfly hugs, great. Like, why are we making that so exclusive? It shouldn't be. Not to say there isn't real value in a clinician doing it. Like, absolutely is, but not everybody can do it with a clinician. Not everybody wants to go to therapy. Not everybody can afford it. And not every negative belief about yourself needs to go have, a 12-week EMDR breakdown. Like, it just doesn't. And so, I'm on a mission. All right, I could tear on about that, but I'm going to stick with the EMDR. Okay. So one of my favorite clinicians of all time who does EMDR therapy is a gal here in El Dorado, close to me in El Dorado Hills. Her name is Dina Robertson Blackford. She has said EMDR is like a power tool. And I believe that. Like, it just executes on a powerful level very, very quickly. But in order to use that power tool, EMDR clinicians are doing a lot of resourcing before you start. And so if you've looked at some of my other content, you know that I'm talking about this like personalized resourcing. There are things that we need to be able to do if we're going to like go back to some kind of a trauma that happened when you were in 4th grade. We need to make sure that your body can handle that you know how to calm yourself down. And some of us weren't really taught how to calm ourselves down. So a nice thing is that you can do a lot of that resourcing in advance and kind of get to know, how do I calm myself down? And that's what that whole set of stuff that I have on the personalized resource toolkit, that is something you would take to an EMDR clinician. Of course, they're going to want to practice those with you, and they may have some different ones that they think would apply to your case, but man, you can get a lot done on your own. Now, if you like doing it with the clinician, do it with the clinician. I loved doing my resourcing with a clinician. But that's not available to every person. So, okay, so I'm just looking down at my notes. So we talked about belief schema. So we're talking about the belief schema, and then the adaptive organ of the brain that we are meant to like adapt. The organ of the brain is meant to adapt to what is going on. So we want successful adaptation, healthy adaptation, not maladaptation. And so EMDR is meant to get at maladaptation. Okay, and then I mentioned that the start of EMDR, Francis Shapiro developed this for soldiers coming home from Vietnam and having PTSD and not knowing kind of how to help them move through their traumas. And this was found to be effective. This was, I believe, the first study set that they had. So these were adult onset traumas, single, like somewhat chronic because you're in theater, you're in battle for, 6 months or whatever their deployments were, and you're enduring very difficult things across many months. But they're the same kind of atrocity. So I think you could still call that sort of single incident, not to minimize it at all. It's awful across time, but it's different from like child onset because we have different brain mechanics that are going on, different ways of understanding the world when we're little. And so child onset and then like chronic across the lifespan, like, or across like many, many years. During all your formative years, you suffered abuse or something like that. So EMDR originally was this sort of adult single incident. That's where the studies were. Since then, it has exploded and has been used for so many things quite successfully. It's used for anxiety. It's used for depression. It's used for children. It's used a lot. OCD. I mean, you name it. Like, think of something that's going on with you and go, I wonder if EMDR would help with that. Yeah, EMDR probably would help with that. And then I mentioned, I'm just looking at my note about the power tool from Dina. That's my favorite quote. Okay, I talked about the tools. So the tools include that light bar. And the light bar just goes back and forth, back and forth. And like I said, it's variable speed. And then there's audio. Sometimes a clinician can, I really wish I was this kind of clinician, can combine audio and the bilateral of the light bar. That's impressive work. And then there's the fingers, which are nice because you always have those with you, right? And then the physical, which mean moving your body or doing something like a butterfly hug or tapping knees, which you can't see me do, but I am tapping my knees. Okay, and then and then I talked about the process of it. So the process of it, if you want to go to EMDR therapy, you find an EMDR clinician and there's lists. A lot of people have EMDR training and are not EMDR certified. Really, I would go based on like temperament and how well you two get along versus whether you're certified or not. To even just learn EMDR is already a really intensive training. People who've gone on to certification, of course, have done much more training. And if you have like a really specific need, I'm trying to think of like, oh boy, like a treatment-resistant depression might be one that you want to go to somebody who's gone to like specific training in using EMDR for depression. If it's sort of generalized depression, probably a non-certified in EMDR clinician, as long as they're, trained in mental health and trained in EMDR, they're going to be be able to help you if you get along with them, if there's that in that alchemy, that there's connection there. So I would probably look for more specialized training versus certification. So I want to go to EMDR therapy and I want somebody who's got experience with agoraphobia, or I want to go to EMDR therapy because, I have treatment-resistant depression or perseverating thoughts or something like that. You can look to see what kind of EMDR they practice. But I would put even that the basic training is pretty extensive. And these are all people who've already completed a master's degree in counseling. So maybe that's just me with that opinion. Okay, so then another thing about the process is, like I mentioned, an EMDR clinician is going to start with resourcing. And resourcing goes on at least one session. Usually, I think 3 or 4 is probably the average. 3 or 4 sessions, just figuring out how you're going to be resourced, how you're going to calm your body down, dealing with your physiology, all of that, like psychoeducation about what is happening with your amygdala, how to access a distressing thought and put it away, that kind of thing. In Roy Kiesling's training, it's like the wheel of fortunate resources. Like when I'm distressed, these are people that I lean on. And also you can do mantra work, like all of the things in my personalized resource toolkit video playlist are the kinds of things that a clinician can do for resourcing. Meeting room is really fun. It's one of my favorites. Anyway, refer to that other set of stuff. So, okay, so the prep work is this resourcing stuff. And again, if you're interested, you can kind of short circuit that by doing that work on your own, practicing with those tools, and then handing over your little toolkit to your clinician and say, these are the ways that so far I've learned that I find myself to be well resourced. And they'll probably be very happy to receive that little manual on the care and keeping of you. And then, so that's the prep work. Then you do the clinical work, and you have 1 target, 10 targets, 100 targets, like that. You're going to work that out with your clinician. And then the session is really, it's about the business. Like EMDR clinicians are about, like, let's get to it. Which is why that's not my favorite, because I like the interpersonal connection, and it's hard for me to switch into, all right, let's get to work. Here's your tappers, and let's get into that. Let's bring, start the conduction, and let's bring on the negative belief schema, and where do you want to go with this? I want to chit chat more, but the EMDR takes so much time. You don't have as much time for the chit chat. And most EMDR clinicians are like, let's get in. So then when you're doing the EMDR sessions, the process goes like, the clinician will kind of, like I said, like be the conductor, bring online the negative belief schema, and help you remember, what you have brought up about what is distressing, what's the worst part of that, where did you feel that in your body. And then, what I like about EMDR is you could just close your eyes and be in your memory. And you don't necessarily have to be like, there's a lot of intimacy and intensity in eye contact with this person who wasn't there. And so it doesn't always feel good to be like that intimate. You know what I mean by intimate? I'm not talking about like sexually intimate. I'm like emotionally vulnerable is probably the thing. I have a real resistance to being vulnerable. And so I like EMDR because I can just close my eyes and I'm just vulnerable with myself, and I can do that all day long. So, you can, obviously, if you're doing a light bar, you have to have your eyes open. Okay. But if you're doing like the knee tapping, if you don't want somebody to touch your knees, you can touch your own. I'm doing it on tap your own legs, and butterfly hug is meant to do for yourself. And we use this one actually for resourcing, where we tap it. It's called tap it in. It's called, it's you're remembering something like your calm place, and you want to install it deeper into your physiology. We would call that tapping it in or installing. But like I said, for the physical touch ones and the tappers, the alternating bilateral stim, you can just have your eyes closed, and you don't really need to share, unless you want to, what is happening in your mind's eye. Now, the sharing doesn't happen at the time. So just imagine yourself, and you've been given the tappers, and you start to process in your mind's eye the trauma. So you're doing a recall of that event that happened in 4th grade and how you felt about yourself. And the clinician runs the tappers. Let's say the tappers, and the tappers go back maybe 25 like round trips, tap, 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 buzz, bilateral stimulation, 20, 30 times. And then they'll turn off the tappers and ask, what did you notice? And then you want to be brief at that point and get back on track. So it could be like, I'm just noticing it was really dark in the room. Great. Go with that, is what the clinician would say. In Roy Kiesling's model, mind you, there are other models, but in Roy Kiesling's model, go with that. And so then the clinician puts the tappers back on, you go back to that, and you do another 20, 30 passes with the bilateral stimulation, and then the clinician stops it. You take a breath. What did you notice? I noticed the scary person was coming through the room. Great, go with that. Turn the tappers back on. You process another 20 times, whatever. So the process has like the way that Dina explained it to me is like you're on a train, and you're on the train of remembering, and you're just looking out the window of that train and seeing the things. You're not in it. You're not re-experiencing. You are seeing it out the window of the train, and the train is going by. And that fits with Roy Kiesling's model. He's like, your brain is already doing the processing. You kind of slow down to even be able to explain it to another person. But the brain is like, whoo, let's go. We're on the train. So you're looking out the window, which you can do as a resource to remind yourself, I'm not reliving this. I'm just looking at it out the window. Okay. And then it's like the train comes into a train stop. and slows down. What did you notice? Oh, I noticed the person coming through the door. Great. Go with that. Pick the speed back up, and the train goes chugging down the track. So that's the way I like to visualize it. I don't know if that's helpful to you. But it does have this sort of recall, pause. And I believe that's related to our brain waves, but I don't know the science of that. I think that's what it's about, but it works. Also, it's a reprieve from you sitting in the trauma. So it reminds your body physiologically, like, this isn't happening to me. I'm just observing what had happened to me. So then you're chugging down that train track. What do you notice? What do you notice? The clinician is doing all kinds of things to manage where you are in your desensitization process. Because remember, it's eye movement, which is the bilateral stim. Desensitization, that's the main work of what you're trying to do. Trying to take the sensitivity out of what has happened to you. And the connecting fiber is the belief schema. I'm trying to make sense of what happened to me. And the adaptation that the maladaptation that my belief about myself is I can't protect myself. I'm not safe. We don't function well in the world if our whole orientation to the world is I'm not safe. So that's maladaptive. So what happens so the clinician, like I was saying, the clinician's doing a lot of things to like notice your pupils if they're dilating, if your eyes are open and you're doing light bar stuff. Your respiration, if you're, crying a lot, like the big cry, EMDR, if you're processing stuff that needs to be cried about, EMDR crying is a lot. You need a whole box of tissues for that. And okay, so then eventually in that process, and this is why I say the conductor has brought this online. So your focus on the desensitization is on the negative event and the belief about yourself, but mostly like what is happening in the negative event. And eventually on those little things of like, what do you notice? The clinician is listening for words like, oh, I remember that I punched him in the face. We're going to move ourselves out of the negative belief schema with that kind of a thought because there's agency. Like I wasn't helpless. So, okay, right. So they say, I noticed I punched him in the face. Okay, go with that. And we go back. I'm feeling like it needs a demo. I should find somebody to demo this with me. That'd be great. Go with that, and then you get back on that train, and they're continuing the memory of wherever it was going, and like then you pause again and say, what did you notice? It'd be something like, I screamed really loud, and then the firefighter could find me. Okay, go with that. And then you're back to processing. So when the clinician is hearing that, now we're moving into the reprocessing side of things. So the EMDR, eye movement, which is that bilateral stimulation, that's many words, bilateral stimulation, and then reprocessing. No, sorry. Desensitizing. So we're getting our body to be not so sensitive to it. Like, okay, I can look at that out the window. I can see what happened. But then the reprocessing is about the installation of a new belief schema. And again, we can't install a new reality. We could just remind ourselves and have a more adaptive thought about ourselves, that we are survivors, that we do have agency, that we are valuable. It depends on what your belief schema that you're working on, what that is. And so that's the overall work of an actual EMDR session. So there's EMDR therapy, which includes all the resourcing, all of the, verbal processing, if you want to do that, the history taking and all of that. The actual EMDR sessions themselves will look like this work with bilateral stimulation, bringing online the negative cognition and all that negative trauma memory stuff, working that through. It's not always a direct line of desensitization. Sometimes it gets complicated, and clinicians have ways to handle that. And then it kind of just naturally moves over to Because again, our brain, the organ of the brain, is an adaptive organ. It wants to have a healthy adaptation. So it will, you already told it where you want to go. I want to feel valuable. I want to feel like I have agency, whatever it is that you were targeting, of what you wish that you felt about on that day in fourth grade when that incident happened. The conductor has helped you bring that online. And then in the reprocessing side of things, you're getting back in touch again with the body and how the body feels in that way. Again, like the clinician probably turned down the speed of the tappers or slowed down so that you could kind of install a feeling of, I've reprocessed it with a different belief schema. So hopefully I'm doing a good enough job of explaining that to you. Let's see, what else did I want to say? Okay, so because you're doing so much in that session, it doesn't always fit in the normal 1 hour block. And also, it's not the kind of thing that you want to like, okay, so some clinicians do it in an hour. Some clinicians do like a 90-minute session. Some people do intensives, but you can only do so much of that work. So it's exhausting. Like I said, it's a power tool. So, you have to do other things in between. You can't just like bulldoze that. It takes a lot of after processing too, actually, because you've really woken things up with the way the brain is thinking about the trauma. And so, it's not uncommon to have like nightmares or feel restless or irritable or like need to like be alone or go for a walk or something like that. Sometimes the aftercare on an EMDR session is pretty intense. I always tell people like, well, like, how after you go out to a massage and you've had deep tissue massage and they're like, you need to hydrate and maybe take a nice soothing shower or something like that. Like those kinds of caretaking things are good after an EMDR session. And so then so maybe you've done a longer session or maybe you'll do more frequent sessions. I have been told, and I believe, I'm not saying this is the only way to go, but I have been told, and I believe that if you're doing EMDR, unlike other kinds of therapy where you could like, I'm going to come in once a month, or I'm just going to do little tune-ups, 2 or 3 sessions in a row. If you're going to do EMDR therapy, like you got to commit to going at least weekly for, probably 5 or 6 weeks. Depending on how complex the trauma is and how well you moved, your brain is able to do those adaptations. There's some resistant stuff in some of us, so sometimes it takes quite a bit of work. But it's not the kind of thing, like I've certainly had clients that are like, look, I want to work on something, but I only want to come to counseling like every 3 weeks or once a month. And my style of clinical care, that's fine. Not every clinician will do that, but I was fine with that. But I wouldn't do that with my EMDR clients. No, I got to see you, like maybe I'll see you Monday and Friday in the same week, and then the following Monday and the following Friday. Like it's just a more intense, and also like emotionally taxing. I'll tell you. Here's how I had gone to my own EMDR therapy for my depression shortly after, probably during my grad program or during the early parts of my internship. I was doing quite a bit of EMDR therapy. But when I went to my my training with Roy, it was funny because he was teaching the class, and the whole time he was teaching, he was like demonstrating like this with his hand. I think I processed so much stuff just I remember being more exhausted from that training than probably any other training I've been to. Maybe TBRI is up there, but that EMDR training was like, ooh, I had nightmares during that training. I remember I had a recall of a trauma that I hadn't remembered that came up during my sleep. And I remember that was on like day 3 of a 5-day training. And or maybe it was day 4, and I had to call my therapist on the way to my training, and I just was sobbing, which was not like me. And like on lunch, people are like, let's go practice our resourcing, or let's go grab food from the junk truck or whatever, and I was like, I'm just gonna go sit in my car. Like, it processed a lot. So when I say it's a power tool, I'm telling you, like, it's getting in there and doing a lot of work. That's the kind of thing, like when I say some of the stuff you can do on your own. Okay, like little T traumas, or like you just want to shape up your belief schema, then maybe you could do that as sort of a self-help program. But if you have more complex stuff like what I was dealing with, and certainly with like a memory that I had tucked away, and then I recalled, like, I wouldn't have wanted to deal with that on my own. That needed a professional to support me through that. And what else do I want to say about EMDR? I'm just checking my list. Okay, so I mentioned sometimes longer sessions or more frequent sessions. You'll want to go with your clinician's advice on that, because they know how they work best. Remember, I was talking about in the alchemy, we're talking about where your clinician is their best self, and where you as a client connect most to that clinician, and then the model of therapy. And so that combination, if the clinician is saying, when I do EMDR, I need to see you twice a week, and we do 1-hour sessions, or I will see you once a week, but we have to do a 90-minute session. That's the way they do it, because that's how they know that they work best. So follow your clinician on that. Okay, and then one more point about the model, and whether the model of therapy, the EMDR therapy, is the right fit for you. To my mind, it has to do with this verbal piece. Sometimes when people are reluctant to go to counseling, it's because they will say things like, I really resisted counseling because I don't want to just sit around and talk about my problems. Great. Yeah, that's a good thing to know about yourself. That's a really good thing to know about yourself. Okay? But that doesn't exclude therapy. I don't want to sit around and talk about my problems doesn't exclude you from therapy, because there are non-verbal ways to get at the actual stuff you're trying to work on. So when I describe that process, yeah, you're going to be spending some time explaining the history of the things that you want to work on, but you don't have to do talk therapy about it. You can do EMDR therapy about it. Okay. The other great thing about the EMDR thing is you can combine it. You can combine it with Santre, which you guys know I love the Santre. So of course I combine, I love the Santre so much. And I think the EMDR is really good with Santre work, especially on the resourcing stuff. Actually on the trauma stuff as well too, because it's such a visual thing. So visual instead of verbal or auditory. But also you can do very minimal talking, like, especially if you've done your pre-work and you know kind of what your target is. I want to work on this belief about myself, and these are my resourcing tools. Then you could just go into the clinician and let them know all that information and say, I don't advocate for yourself. I don't really want to describe this to you. If that is your thought, a good clinician for you is one that doesn't need you to describe it. Does that make sense? Like, that's part of what you're looking for. And that is one of the 3 main ingredients of the counseling. What are you looking for? I'm looking for somebody that doesn't make me describe in excruciating details. Likewise, if you're the kind, so here's another thing about me. So Debbie Show once again. I like to do the processing on my own, but whatever revelations I come up with, whatever I've interpreted, I kind of want to talk about that. And sometimes I'll just talk with myself about that and do some journaling. But it gets pretty exciting when you have a new way of experiencing something that has been really dark and heavy. Sometimes you do want to talk about that. So, you can make it what you want it to be. Lots of opportunity to use your boundaries with a therapist. And if the therapist can't handle a boundary, not a good therapist. Okay. That's all I've got for you on EMDR. I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you on the next one.